Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back for the first time for a couple of weeks together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One place. What are we covering this week?
Well, we're doing our usual market updates. Of course, we'll do a bit of an overview of this week's Pulse event, a bit of a trade update because it's been a bit messy in the trade data sphere in the last little while, and of course, chat of the week.
Okay. Well, let's start in Europe and just focusing on the big action and the fragile butter market. This week, we've seen a jump up in futures and spot prices in some regions. Quite a fragile situation, delicate situation. You say there's a lot of nervy people around this market. I think milk has got tighter, cream prices have gone back up, and maybe it's a case of buyers coming back from Cial, the lavish event in Paris, and realising, oh, well, what the heck, and they need to cover. So what it's done is push futures up, particularly in that period, December to March, pushed up 4 to 7%, and that's mostly happened this week, Monday. So it is pretty interesting that we've got that reaction. This is part of what's behind it. The cream price has gone back up to 10 euros a kilogram and beyond, which pushes up the viable price to make butter. So if at that price, if the butter price is lower, naturally people will avoid production, and so that just limits supply. And again, we're back in that bind. Spot milk's also been steady to firmer in Germany and Netherlands. So we're not over those production issues yet by a long shot, it seems.
Yeah, and in contrast, skim milk powder's just drifting weaker, Steve. Not much to see here, just a little bit back in this week's futures forward curve there. And whole milk powder futures on the SGX, they've recovered some lost ground. So we've just got an interesting shape of that curve there. It's just lifted in those earlier months up to June next year, just in the last week or so. So interesting shape there, sort of like a downward dog from the side.
There was a positive Pulse event last week, maybe partly to do with that, and we'll talk about this week, sure. And then cheese. So with the declining, we've seen the fat market correct in recent weeks, and with that, cheese prices have come off. Mozzarella more than other cheese types come off quite a bit, as you can see. And we've used this chart a couple of weeks ago. Things are gradually coming back together again. But Joe, in the US, what's happening there?
Yeah, we've just seen the cheese market in the US weaken a little bit. We are looking at this futures curve as being pretty optimistic for it to be, even though it's weakened a bit in those early periods, for it to be flat right out to basically this time next year. Very optimistic given what's happening with cheese capacity, which is at this moment that cheese is starting to be produced from some of those new factories. Demand's a little better in the short term, which, that's positive for the cheese market, but increasing that availability is going to, really swamp that very mild demand improvement. Stocks report last week was supportive, and we'll talk a bit more about this a little later on.
So in that outlook, exports become very important. So we're bringing the butter fat market, the impact that has on European cheese values, and overlaying that on the US futures values for cheese. This brings it all together to see what's that export outlook for European versus US mozzarella, and this is a good way to represent it. So the black line, as we've explained before, is our projected value based on where the forward prices of fat and protein are. Fairly reliable, tight fit in history between those prices. And then when we look at that in euros, that's a gap that's come back together a bit. In US dollars?
Yeah, this is how it looks in US dollars. And in terms of export opportunities for US cheese manufacturers, it's really that gap that counts, Steve. And the difference there, in another way of speaking, is about 10 to 15 cents a pound. It's widened a little bit in those early months there. but it's unlikely it's going to be wide enough to win a lot of business, because a lot of that export business for US manufacturers right now is very much price-based, and there's probably not enough of a discount there to make a material difference.
So that goes back into that discussion about where the forward prices are, that exports need to be a part of that solution for the US, given the size of the capacity that's coming on into production. So that's going to put pressure on prices domestically, you'd think.
Absolutely.
Pulse result last night.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Steve, we had a positive Pulse result last week when we didn't do a video because we were in the air. But this week, another positive one. We've got whole milk powder up 2.1% or $75 a tonne from the prior Pulse event, and up 3.1% or $110 a tonne from the previous GDT auction. Coincidentally, skim milk powder is also up $110 a tonne from the last GDT auction, and that's 4%, but it's also up 2% or $55 a tonne from last week. So that's a pretty positive result, Steve. Going into the peak of the New Zealand season, we'd expect that there would be a fair bit of product coming on stream, but obviously there's good demand there as well from the region. So,
and maybe we're turning a corner in that respect.
Absolutely.
So looking at some global trade, as you said, we're tidying up a few things here because there's been a lot of releases in the period that we haven't been doing videos. So catching up on those a bit.
Mm-hmm. So we've got some global export data, Steve, here for the month of up to the month of August. And overall, it was up just 0.2%. So you can just about see it on that chart there against the orange line. It's still down 0.8% over the 6 months to August. So, not a lot of action overall in terms of this milk solids equivalent measure. But as always, the interesting stuff's in the details. So when we're looking at this milk solids equivalent trends by region, this is the really interesting stuff, Steve. So over the last 3 months, you can see Southeast Asia has really come back in terms of their trade. And you can also see that big gaping hole left by China and some of the other regions coming on stream too, also down in the Middle East and North Africa.
And that's, I guess, in that region, we saw a big stock up earlier in the year, which is now coming back in terms of powders.
Sure.
Juicy trade requirements. China's import data came out in the last week as well. And again, this is a chart that is titled growth, and we do use growth in some parts of the axis for some of these bars, but it's mostly about how far down trade is.
Negative growth.
Milk solids equivalent down 22% in September's imports, and down 70% in 6 months Q2 and Q3. So a pretty miserable story. We do have some glimmers of hope there. Whey trade, as we know, whey powder trade has been up. But milk powder's just getting worse as we go further in percentage terms. Now, September is a low month. August, September are quite low. So it's not the end of the earth, but we are seeing big percentage drops. When we also look at New Zealand's exports, which came out last week as well, trade
same month, right?
This is September trade. That's correct. Yeah, up 4% overall. Quite a mixed bag again. Both powders are down significantly, and we'll come on to more of that. But and you'll talk about powders next, Joe. Cheese up 15% in the last 3 months, and that's been across the board. So it's pretty healthy, that cheese trade, as we've seen globally. That China, Japan, the Middle East, the highest growth in cheese in absolute terms. Fats have rebounded, ironically, at the highest prices. So that price line, if I showed that here, would be just going higher and higher, and yet we've seen growth in both AMF and bar in this last month. Pretty strong infant formula recovery, up 15% the last year. And to make sure we could read the chart well, because the MPC growth in the month was nearly treble the prior year. So I just combined skim milk powder and MPCs on the right-hand side there, and that's pretty healthy growth as well. And as you can see, the MPC bar, the black bar, is going down. So it is a heavy influence of the stronger exports of milk protein concentrates. Obviously, that's the story we've been talking about as well, Joe, that, they're New Zealand it's got to use a lot of protein, given the whole milk powder decline. And so trying to value add that and push it into higher value proteins at NPCs are where we can see that. We assume there that NPCs are at 70% concentration, 2 times the skim use. There may be higher concentrations, so it could be even bigger.
Sure.
Effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just drilling into some of the powder export trends, Steve. Looking at whole milk powder in total, you can see those bars there. They look pretty bad, but you can really, again, see the big hole being left by China and also North Africa. So some big backward trends in terms of exports to those regions. Whole milk powder was down 14% and down 6.5% in that Q3 quarter. And then turning to skim milk powder, it's a little bit of a more mixed story over the 3-month and 6-month period. But again, China and Hong Kong there, well down, nearly 20% down for the 3-month and 6-month period. But Southeast Asia, look at that comeback, Steve. Really much stronger in the last 3 months, around 50% higher. So overall, skim milk powder down 17% for the month of September, 19% down for Q3. But Southeast Asia is really going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and all may do that.
Yeah.
EU exports also, Job, this is a bit of a revisit. This has been out a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we were pretty blown away by the cheese export data for August, but they turned out not to be real. So it was an overstatement of cheese exports into 4 countries, 2 each in South America and 2 in Southeast Asia. It overstated the monthly exports of cheese by about 27,000 tonnes. So it left EU exports of cheese down 1.8% year on year for the month, not up 21%, which was really quite startling. And across the board there, Steve, again, some pretty negative trends in terms of exports for whole milk powder and skim milk powder. That same story for powders, but also quite negative for fat there in the August data.
Yeah. We will get a revision from Eurostat eventually, but we've made a determination based on what we've seen in the nitty-gritty detail here as to where the errors are apparently sitting. Joe, wrap it up with Chart of the Week.
We're back in the US, Steve, and US cheese inventory data came out late last week and it showed a really significant drop in particularly American type cheese, which was down 8% year on year for September. It's one of the larger scale of decreases for the month. There hasn't been such a low stock number for American style cheeses since November 2020. September is all over the place. We were just looking at the trends there. It can be up, it can be down, but it's way a larger drop than average, Steve, month to month over the past 10 years. So interesting. There have been quite a few supply issues in the last couple of months leading up to this stock number. Again, demand has been a little bit better, but not startling. And of course, we're going to have a lot more cheese coming down the pipeline in the next little while. So, yeah, interesting.
Well, that's a decent wrap. We covered quite a bit of territory. That's all from us. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for watching.